to speak as if in morning business.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. President. I just want to make some comments regarding what the junior senator from Missouri just was talking about on the floor, and I know that my colleague from Hawaii was providing commentary as well. It's hard to comprehend how any member of Congress, House or Senate, could come to the floor and make the criticism of the Biden administration regarding its Ukraine policy, especially with regard to the military assistance provided by this administration. And that same senator, along with a long list of Republican senators, voted against all the money for Ukraine just a couple of weeks ago, $13.6 billion. But unfortunately, it's entirely consistent with what those same 31 senators have been doing for the last couple of weeks. They voted against all the money in March, and then they criticize President Biden. In fact, the day of President Zelensky's speech to the Congress, that inspiring speech that so many of us were moved by, people in both parties, both houses, all across the country, in fact, across the world, were moved by what he said, and frankly, challenged by what he said. We have to do more, even in my judgment, than the $13.6 billion. But as the junior senator from Missouri should know, I hope he knows this, that since the beginning of this administration, just on the military assistance, we've provided $2.6 billion. So more than $2.5 billion just on military assistance. But the bulk of that is in that spending bill that we passed a couple of weeks ago that had the $13.6 billion. Here's what the Washington Post says, and I'll read the headline and the date and then ask consent to enter it into the record. Here's the headline, quote, "More than 24 Senate Republicans demand Biden do more for Ukraine after voting against $13.6 billion for Ukraine," dated March 17th, 2022. A story by Mariana Alfaro and Eugene Scott. I would ask consent that this article be made part of the record.
Without objection.
Here's the subheadline. 31 Senate Republicans voted last week against the $1.5 trillion spending bill to fund the government, increase U.S. defense spending, and provide humanitarian and military assistance to Ukraine. In recent days, many of them have clamored for more weapons and aid. It goes on from there, and I'm not going to read all of it, obviously, but it chronicles the hypocrisy that we just heard here today and that we've heard for days now and weeks now, criticizing the president when they voted against all the money. So all the money from the $13.6 billion that will go to pay for the Javelin missiles that are taking out Russian tanks every day and have for weeks. Every penny of that out of the 13.6, you could probably cut it in half in terms of what the military assistance will be. So let's say, for sake of argument, probably half of that, $6 or $7 billion. But whatever the exact number is, that money is going to help pay for a lot more Javelin missiles that have been so effective. The Stinger systems that they've used, the anti-aircraft systems, they're all going to be paid for. The ammunition and the body armor and all of the other assistance that we're providing is going to be made possible because most of the Senate, 50 Democrats and just 19 Republicans, but we're grateful for their support, voted for the money. So if you have a criticism about the administration's policy, you're certainly entitled to criticize the administration. But I think you lose your right to criticize the administration on military assistance and what we're doing or not doing on military assistance when you just voted against all the money. All the money. and yet they do it over and over again as if no one's watching. Well, I think the American people get it. And I think they know the difference between someone who can justifiably criticize any administration on foreign policy or defense policy or anything else. But I think you should admit on the record that you didn't vote for the money. Don't throw sand in the eyes of the people. Admit on the record that you didn't vote for the money, and then lodge your criticism. But of course, he didn't do that, and so many who voted the wrong way. Now, the Washington Post also notes in this article that obviously it was a spending bill that will allow us to fund the government. We could talk about that, whether or not you support funding the government. But here's a point that was made in the article that I think a lot of people may have missed, is that this funding bill also paid for a pay increase for our troops. U.S. service members got a pay increase in this bill. And yet, you would never know that by listening to some of the folks who voted the wrong way on the bill. You would think that that wasn't part of this legislation. So I think a lot of Americans probably expect that when you're making an argument against an administration, you have the right to do that. But I think it would be a lot more truthful if you were clear about where you voted on the biggest Ukraine spending measure in recent history. Maybe likely not just the biggest ever for Ukraine, the biggest ever for a lot of countries that we help. So I hope that people across this chamber and across the country will make note of that contradiction. Because when you voted against those dollars for Ukraine, you were voting against not only the people of Ukraine and their ability to fight this war, and obviously the soldiers in the field, but you're voting against that humanitarian support as well that will provide food and medical care and so much else. Now, I am in no way satisfied that we've done enough. We've got to do a lot more. We got to provide, in my judgment, a river, an ever-rushing stream of weapons, as many weapons as it takes to defeat Vladimir Putin. So we're going to have more debates, and senators will have more opportunities to vote the right way when it comes to supporting the people of Ukraine. But I think it would be better for the debate if folks would mention how they voted, that they voted against the Ukraine money, that they voted against a pay raise for the troops, and they voted against a lot of other provisions. But to come onto the Senate floor and to criticize the president on military assistance, that's the height of hypocrisy. Mr. President, I would yield the floor.
The senator from Iowa is recognized.
Senator